Hello. Today's lesson is fractions and properties of addition. So let's go ahead and review some of those um, properties that we've talked about earlier in the school year. The associative and commutative properties of addition can help you group and order add-ins to find sums mentally. You can use mental math to combine fractions that have a sum of 1. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on the fraction parts. And can we rearrange the numbers or how they're grouped to get fractions that equal 1? So we're going to be looking for, can we add the numerators so that they match the denominator? That's our goal, okay? So review, the commutative property states that when the order of two add-ins is changed, the sum is the same. For example, when we were adding 4 plus 5, that's the same as adding 5 plus 4. The associative property states that when the grouping of add-ins is changed, the sum is the same. For example, if I have 5 plus 8 plus 4, well, I'm going to get the same answer if I group the 8 with the 4 to add first. So 5 plus 8 plus 4 in parentheses. Okay, so initially they were grouping the 5 plus the 8, and on the other side they grouped the 8 plus 4 to start the problem. Okay, so we're going to be looking at those two properties today, again, to help us add fractions or mix numbers with fractions. The map shows 4 lighthouses in the Florida Keys, and their distances apart in miles. The Dry Tortugas Lighthouse is the farthest west, and the Alligator Reef Lighthouse is the farthest east. What is the distance from the Dry Tortugas Lighthouse to the Alligator Reef Lighthouse, traveling between the 4 lighthouses? So when we look at this, they're saying we want to go from here, past the Key West Lighthouse, past the Sombrero Key Lighthouse, ending at the Alligator Reef Lighthouse. And these are their distances. Okay. So from the first one to the second lighthouse is 70 and 5/10 miles. Then we travel another 43 and 6/10 mile. And finally 34 and 5/10. Okay. And so it says use properties to order and group. So when we look at these fractions, I have mixed numbers 70 and 5/10, 43 and 6/10, and 34 and 5/10. So these are just ordered the way it was written on the map, okay, as they show up on the map. But now when we add them, we don't have to go in that order, okay? So when I look at 5/10 and 6/10, that actually isn't the best ones to add because that gives me 11/10, and then I'm going to have to regroup. So what about 5/10 and 5/10? Now that would be 10/10, right? So let's put those two together. So we're going to start with 70 and 5/10, and we're going to move to 34 and 5/10. We're going to switch places with the 43 and 6/10 and the 34 and 5/10. So that's the commutative property. All we did was change the order in which we're going to add those two. Okay. All right. So now, based on the order of operations, we just add left to right. Okay, with addition. So let's add 70 and 5/10, 34 and 5/10. So if we group them with the grouping symbols, we're actually applying the associative property. So we're saying, I want you to add these two things first. And then we'll add 43 and 6/10. Just keep in mind that technically, even without these symbols, we should add left to right. Okay, when you only have addition or subtraction, we just go left to right. But the associative property and the grouping symbols tells us do that first. Okay, so 5/10 and 10/10. That's 1. Okay, so we have 70 plus 34 plus 1. Well, 70 and 34 is 104. Plus 1 more gives us 105. 5. Okay. And then we have 43 and 6/10. Okay, so we know that our fraction part is 6/10. And now we have to add 105 and 43. 5 and 3 is 8. 4 and nothing is 4. And 1 and nothing is 1. So 148 and 6/10 mile. I see that 6/10 is even. So I can simplify 6/10 by dividing by 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3. 10 divided by 2. 2 times what is 10? 5. So we could say or 148 and 3/5. So the distance from the dry Tortugas Lighthouse to the Alligator Reef Lighthouse, traveling between the 4 lighthouses is 148 and 6/10 miles, or the equivalent is 148 and 3/5 miles. Okay. 314. Use the properties and mental math to solve. Show each step and name the property used. All right, so right now it's telling us they want us to add these two things first. Well, if we want to find fractions that are going to be equal to 1, I see 2/3 and 1/3. Well, that would be equal to each other. I mean, that would add up to 3/3. So let's go ahead and practice that by changing the order of our two addends in the parentheses. And that's called the commutative property that allows us to do that. Okay, all we did was switch the order. Okay, now I'm going to apply the associative property so that the 3 and 2/3 is grouped with 1 and 1/3. So that would be the associative property. All right, 1/3 and 1/3 and 2/3 is 3/3. That's 1, right? So we have 1 plus 4 plus 2. 1 plus 4 is 5. 5 plus 2 is 7. Okay. Number 1, complete, name the property used. All right, so I'm looking here. We have 3 and 4/10, 5 and 2/10, and 6/10. On the other side, I see that now 5 and 2/10 comes first, and 3 and 4/10 second. So they changed the order of that. So we're going to put 6/10 there, and that step was the commutative property of addition. And then they regrouped the 3 and 4/10 with the 6/10. And that would make sense because 6 and 4 is 10. And 10/10 would equal 1. So you see why they would want those to group together. So by regrouping, changing the grouping, that's the associative property. All right. So again, 10/10 plus 3. That would be 4, which equals 3 plus 1, because 10/10 is equal to 1, so 4. All right, so now we have 5 and 2/10 plus 4. 5 and 4 is 9. 9 and 2/10, or remember, 2/10 is even, so I can simplify by dividing by 2, and I'd get 1/5. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 2 divided by 2 is 1. So 9 2/10 or 9 1/5. Okay. Number 2, use properties in mental math to find the sum. All right, 2 7/8 plus 3 2/8 plus 1 1/8. Well, if I can get the fractions to be 8/8, that would equal 1 whole. 7 2 is actually over, so that would be a fraction greater than 1. But if I added the 1 to the 7, that would be 8/8. So let's switch the order of these two. Okay, so why am I switching the order? Because I want to regroup and put 2 7/8 with 1 1/8. Okay, so I'm using commutative property. I'm going to abbreviate as COMM, commutative property. And now I'm going to regroup. I'm going to put 3 2/8 on the outside, and I'm going to group 2 7/8 with 1 1/8. Okay, so that's the associative property. Associative. And now 7/8 and 1/8 we know is 8/8. 8/8 is 1. So we have 2 plus 1. Those are the whole numbers, right? Plus 8/8. Well, that's the same as 2 plus 1 plus 1. So that's 4. So we have 3 2/8 plus 4. 2, 3, 4. So we get 7 2/8. Or 2/8 can be reduced by dividing by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 8 divided by 2 is 4. So 7 2/8 or 7 1/4. Number 3. Okay, this is basically the same thing as number 2. We want this 3/5 to be able to be added to the 2/5. So we need to switch the order of the add-ins inside the parentheses. So we're going to have 1 2/5 plus 3/5 plus 1. And the property that allows us to do that is the commutative property of addition. Now we're going to regroup. We're going to change the grouping. And the property that allows us to do that is the associative. Okay, so now we have 3/5 plus 2/5, and that's 5/5. So that's good. So we're going to get 1 plus 5/5 plus 1. 5/5 is 1. So we have 1 plus 1 plus 1. 2 plus 1 is 3. Okay. 5 3/6 plus 5 5/6 plus 4 3/6. So I look here and I see that 3/6 plus 3/6, that would be 6/6. So let's switch the order so that we can add the 2 3/6 together. Commutative property allows us to change the order of add-ins without changing the sum. Now that we have 5 3/6 plus 4 3/6 close together, we can now group them together so that we add them first. Okay, so I'm now joining 4 3/6 with the 5 3/6. And outside will be 5 5/6. And what property allows us to do that? That's the associative. So if we're grouping things differently, this is associative property. Now, why did we do that? Well, 5 and 4 is 9. 3/6 plus 3/6 is 6/6. Well, 6/6 is equal to 1. Plus 5 and 5/6. So 9 plus 1 plus 5 and 5/6. So 10 plus 5 and 5/6. Okay, so what have I done? I renamed the 6/6 as 1, because that's what it's equal to. I added 9 plus 1, that gave me 10. And now we need to add the 5 and 5/6. Well, 10 and 5 is 15. And in the fraction part, there's nothing added to it. So 15 and 5/6. Okay, number 5. All right, 1 and 1 is 2/4. But if I add 3 and 1, that would be 4/4. So let's just change how they're grouped. Okay, so I didn't need to change the order of them, one, because they're both the same. Okay, the add-ins are the same. So, but I want 1 and 1/4 to be added to the 3/4. So I'm going to group them differently. So we have 1 and 1/4 plus 1 plus 2 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. So 4/4. Oh, this is the associative property. All right. And so 1 and 1/4 plus 3 plus 1. So all I did right there was just rename the 4/4 as 1. So now we have 1 and 1/4 plus 4. 4 plus 1 is 5 and 1. Number 6. 12 and 4/9 plus 1 and 2/9 plus 3 and 5/9. 4 and 2 is 6/9. 5 and 2 is 7/9. 5 and 4, that's 9/9. So we want the 12 and 4/9 to be next to the 3 and 5/9. So how can we do that? How are we going to get 12 and 4/9 next to 3 and 5/9? We need to switch the order, right, of the add-ins inside the parenthesis. So that would look like this. Okay, plus 3 and 5/9. So we now have 12 and 5/9, 4/9 next to 3 and 5/9, but I still can't add them together because they're still grouped with 1 and 2/9. So right now we've just used the commutative property to switch the order. We now want to change how they're grouped. I want 12 and 4/9 grouped with 3 and 5/9. And that's the associative property. 12 and 3 is 15. 4/9 and 5/9 is 9/9. Okay, so we can rename 9/9 as 1. So now we have 1 and 2/9 plus 16. Well, 16 plus 1 is 17 and 2/9. Okay. And number 7. 3/12 and 8/12. That's 11/12. 9/12 plus 8/12. That's 17/12. But 9/12 and 3/12. That's 12/12. So how can we get this 9/12 next to the 3/12? We can move it, right? We can change the order of these two add-ins. Let's do that. So we're going to have 3/12 plus the sum of 9/12 plus 1 and 8/12. Again, that's the commutative property. That allows us to do that. Now we're going to regroup by grouping 9/12 with the 3/12, and then add the 1 and 8/12. And that is the associative property. So 12/12 plus 1 and 8/12. Well, 12/12 can be renamed as 1. So 1 plus 1 and 8/12 gives us 2 and 8/12. 8/12. Well, you know what? I recognize that 4 is a factor of both 8 and 12. So I can simplify that by dividing by 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3. So our actual answer is 2 and 8/12 or 2 and 2/3. Okay. Number 8. Use properties in mental math to find the sum. So we have 1/3 plus 1/3 in as far as fractions in the parentheses. That gives us 2/3. But 2/3 and 1/3, that would be 3/3, which is equal to 1. So let's change. We don't need to change the order, right? Because the 1/3 is next to 2/3. So let's just change the grouping. So instead of the 45 and 1/3 grouped with 6 and 1/3, let's group the 6 and 1/3 with 38 and 2/3. All right. So we're using the associative property here to do that. And so 38 and 6, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44. 44 plus the fraction part, 1/3 plus 2/3 is 3/3. So we have 45 and 1/3 plus 44 plus 1. All I did there was just rename the 3/3 as 1 plus 45. Well, what's 45 plus 45? 5 and 5 is 10. Regroup as 1 10 and 0 ones. 4 and 4 is 8. Plus 1 more is 9. So 90 and 1/3. Number 9. 1/2 plus 103 1/2 plus 12. Well, right now, if we put the two halves together, that would be one whole, right? So let's just change the grouping. Okay, all we did was grouped 103 1/2 with the other half. Okay. So again, that's the associative property of addition. So we have 103 plus 2 halves. Okay, the 2 halves is from 1/2 plus 1/2 plus the 12. So 103 plus 1 plus 12. 103 plus 1 is 104 plus 12. 12 plus 4 is 16, so 116 for number 9. Okay. Number 10. 3 and 5/10 plus 10 plus 11 and 5/10. We want this 3 and 5/10 to be next to this 11 and 5/10. So let's change the order first. Let's start with 10 plus 3 and 5/10 plus 11 and 5/10. Okay, so we switched the order. That's the commutative property of addition that allows us to do that. Now I want to change the grouping so that the 5/10 and the 5/10 can be added together. So I'm going to separate the 10 out. I'm going to go 3 and 5/10 plus 11 and 5/10. The property that allows us to group them differently is the associative. The associative property of addition. And so now we have 10 plus 3 and 11 is 14. Okay, all I did was added the whole numbers, 11 and 3, to give me 14, plus the fraction part. And the whole reason we put those two fractions together was because it was going to be equal to 1. All right, so 10 plus 14 plus 1. So we have 10 plus 15. 10 plus 15 is 25. Okay, number 11. 1 and 4/10 plus 37 and 3/10 plus 6/10. 6 and 3 is 9/10, right? That's not really helpful. 4 and 3 is 7/10. But if I add 4 and 6, that would be 10/10. So we have to get the 6/10 next to the 4/10. Well, right now, 37 and 3/10 is, in a sense, in the way. It's in the middle. So let's flip these. Let's flip the order of them. All right. What allows us to do that? That's called what? Commutative property of addition. Now, technically, I still can't add those two together because the parenthesis says you have to do those first. So I want to regroup those. I want to group that like that so that the 6/10 is with the 4/10. So now 37 and 3/10 is on the outside of the parentheses. The property that allows us to group add-ins differently is the associative property again. So now we can go 1 plus 10/10 plus 37 and 3/10. 1 plus 1 plus 37 and 3/10. Okay, 1 and 1 is 2 plus 37 and 3/10. So that's 39 and 3/10. Number 12. 3/12 plus 5/12, that's 8/12. No, that's not really helpful. 5/12 and 9/12, that's 14/12. That's not helpful. 9 and 3 is 12, though. So let's switch the order. So the 3/12 is next to the 9/12. Commutative property allows us to do that. Now let's regroup. Not regroup. Let's change the grouping of our add-ins. Let's put the 3/12 with the 9/12. And that's the associative property. So 10 and 5/12 plus 12/12. Okay. 10 and 5/12 plus 1. 12/12 is 1. 10 and 1 is 11. So 11 and 5/12. 13. 5 and 7/8 plus 6 and 3/8 plus 1/8. Well, I see that 7/8 and 1/8 would give me 8/8, which would be great. So let's change the order of the add-ins in the parentheses. All right. Now let's change the grouping to put the 1/8 with 5 7/8 by the associative property. 5 7/8 plus 1/8 would be 5 plus 8/8. So the whole number plus the fraction part plus 6 3/8. So 5 plus 1 plus 6 3/8. 5 plus 1 is 6. Now 6 plus 6 3/8 is 12 3/8. Because 6 plus 6 is 12. 3 is prime. It's not a factor of 8, so we are in simplest form. 14. Which property of addition would you use to regroup the addends in expression A? So let's look at expression A. Well, 7 and 4, that's not real helpful. But 7 and 1 would be, right? And so if I did that, they would be grouped together. So what property is that? That's the associative property. All right. So the associative property. And which two expressions have the same value? Well, okay, so let's look at this one. That's 8/8. 8/8 is 1. So we have 1 and 4/8, or 1 1/2. This one is equal to the 2 1/2. Which two expressions? Okay, so now 3/7 plus 4/7. I'm going to change the order of the 4/7 and the 1/2 by the commutative property. I'm then going to regroup 3/7 plus 4/7 plus 1/2. So 3/7 plus 4/7 is 7/7. That's 1. So 1 1/2. So there's 2 right there. So expressions A and C. Expressions A and C. Okay. Let me rewrite C down here just so we can see it. So the first thing I did was I changed the order of the 4/7 so it was next to 3/7. Then if we use the associative property, we're going to get 7/7 plus 1/2. 7/7 is equal to 1. 1 plus half, 1 1/2. And we already said that A was also 1 1/2. Okay, so now 16. Match the equation with the property used. Okay, so let's look carefully at these. All right, I see 6/12 plus the sum of 6/12 and 3/12. On the other side, now I see 6/12 grouped with 6/12. Well, that's the associative property. If you change the grouping, that's the associative property. All right, this one, 3 2/5 plus 5 4/5 plus 2 1/5 is equal to 3 2/5 again. And all I see differently is that these are in different orders. Different order. So that's the commutative. 4 1/6 plus 3 5/6 plus 2 2/6. So I still see the mixed numbers grouped together here, but they're in different order. So again, that's the commutative property. And then we have 1 and 1/8 plus 5/8 plus 3 and 3/8. So I see the exact same numbers, same order, so it's not commutative. They're just grouping them differently. So that's associative. And page 316. All right. So costumes are being made for the High School Musical. The table at the right shows the amount of fabric needed for costumes of the male and female leads. Alice uses the expression 7 and 3/8 plus 1 and 5/8 plus 2 and 4/8 to find the total amount of fabric needed for the costume of the female lead. To find the value of the expression using mental math, Alice used the properties of addition. 7 and 3/8 plus 1 and 5/8 plus 2 and 4/8. So she grouped 7 and 3/8 plus 1 and 5/8 plus 2 and 4/8. All right, so Alice added 7 and 1 and was able to quickly add 3/8 and 5/8 to the sum of 8 to get 9. That's true. She added 2 and 4/8 to 9, so her answer was 11 and 4/8. So the amount of fabric needed for the costume of the female lead actor is 11 and 4/8 yards. Write a new problem using the information for the costume for the male lead actor. Okay, so well, in a sense, we're kind of just repeating the words, except we're going to replace female lead with male lead. Costumes are being made for the High School Musical. Table at the right shows the amount of fabric needed for the costumes of the male and female leads. Alice uses the expression 1 and 2/8 plus 2 and 3/8 plus 5 and 6/8 to find the total. How much fabric is needed? All right, so basically I just used the same question as 17 except focused on the male uh, mixed numbers needed, the amount of fabric needed for the male costumes. So how much fabric is needed? That's basically our question. So we have 1 and 2/8 plus 2 and 3/8 plus 5 and 6/8. So if I was Alice, I would want to put 1 and 2/8 with 5 and 6/8 and then add 2 and 3/8 because 8/8 is 1, 5 and 1 is 6, so that would be 7 right there. But so 6 plus 8/8. That's what I would be doing in my head. 6 plus 8/8. And I would recognize that that's 7. So then I would add 2 and 3/8 to that and get 9 and 3/8 yards fabric. Explain how using the properties of addition makes both problems easier to solve. Okay. The commutative property allowed me to put fractional parts together, not together, next to each other. That would be equal to 1. The associative property allows me to add those two fractional parts together. The commutative property allowed me to put the fractional parts next to each other so that they would be equal to 1. To put the fractional parts next to each other, that would be equal to 1. The associative property allows me to add those two fractional parts together. Easily in my head. Okay. All right, so that's it for lesson 7-9. Our next lesson will be problem solving using multi-step fraction problems. And so until our next session, may the numbers always be in your favor.